On such a brilliant night. So thanks very much for turning up. I want you to relax. I'm not going to ask anybody any questions, right? And I'm going to talk a lot about history, so there'll be names and dates. Don't worry about any of that. What I want to try and get through to you is a sense of what it was like to live here in the 1880s, 1890s, 1900s, and what Anaconda was like. Because how this talk came up, when they asked me to do a talk, we talked about different subjects, and we sort of settled on this. And this talk comes from a letter, a single letter that I read on the Drumgoolin site. And it was of a man from Liatroim in Anaconda in Montana writing home to his brother. And in his brother, he mentions all the people from Liatroim and Hilltown and Carcullion and everywhere that actually were working in Montana. And I thought, why did all these people go? When I looked at it, you look at Anaconda, and I'm going to show you it. I thought, why did these people go there at this time? Because there were hundreds of them, all from this area. So that's the thought. I thought the theme we'll try and explore. I'm doing the talk tonight in honor of a very good friend of mine, Michael McCartan, who passed away, who a lot of you know as well. Michael was brilliant for me when I was writing the book about Grantia. Gave me loads and loads of stuff. So the talk's free, but we have a wee donation box at the back for charity. I know some people coming in have put some money in. If you haven't put some money in, drop a few shillings in on the way out if you enjoyed it, because we want to raise some money for Michael's charity. I've also got some books for you to look at up here. And at the end, there's a chance to come up and share experiences, because when I started the talk, more and more people came in and said, have you heard about my uncle and my great-grandfather and this? So the number of names I now have is phenomenal. The names that I'm going to show on the screen are just a small example of the names that people have sent through. So lots of people here will have personal experiences of it. And in fact, somebody came in tonight to give me this, to show me this. This is an actual cup from copper mined in Anaconda, right? So we actually have one here. The other thing is the talk is being filmed, so nobody swear, right? Or we'll have to bleep it out. The talk's being filmed, and hopefully we're going to try and get it up on a site or YouTube or something like that, because a lot of people from England and other places wanted to see it, and even in America, because I got in touch with America and they wanted to see it, so hopefully we'll get a wee bit wider. The talk takes about an hour, right? I'll rattle through it as quick as I possibly can, and then you have a chance to ask any questions, but keep your questions to the end, because if people start asking questions, we'll be here at about 1 o'clock in the morning, which is all right for me, but probably you want to get home. So, just to say, in preparing this talk, I've got to thank a few people. You'll see them there. Brona Cunningham, who's sitting in the audience. Brona was brilliant. She gave me access to her master's degree because she actually researched this on a lot of the men who went to Anaconda. So all those people there have given me information, name and no one's no. Thank you very much. So, what I wanted to try and find out is, why would anybody leave this place? That's Liatroim and the surrounding district from the Windy Gap. And I drove over the Windy Gap tonight, and you can see the moorings laid out below you. Beautiful. Stunningly beautiful, right? Why would anybody want to leave here at all? And especially, why would anybody want to leave to end up here? That's Anaconda, about the 1890s. And when you look at it, it actually looks like hell. So why would you leave here to go there? So that's the theme we're going to explore, because people go for different reasons. So what we're going to look at, what was this area like in the 19th, early 20th century? We'll look at how was it politically, what was the social area, aspects, how about land ownership, living conditions. In that, we've got to talk a wee bit about the Land League, about the Gaelic League, and about Home Rule, because those are the big things that were happening at that time. We'll talk about famine, eviction, and sectarian strife, because again it was happening here. And then, what future was there for people who were living here at this time? Why did they choose to emigrate? And then after that, we'll talk a wee bit about emigration, about where did they go to, why did they go there, what was it like there, how did they settle, how did they live there. So that's what we're going to do. So talk is sort of two halves. One half is about here, and the other half is about over there. If we look at emigration in Ireland, it breaks down into 4 distinct phases. top left-hand corner, you've got the phase which is about from 1600s to the 1700s. And that was, in a sense, exile and emigration through war. So after the Elizabethan Wars, you would have had a thing called the Flight of the Earls. The Flight of the Earls was when the great Gaelic lords, the O'Neills, the O'Cackans, all left here from Ramelton and went to the continent. So that was the first, in a sense, of exile or emigration. Then, 1641 rebellion. After that, we have Oliver Cromwell. Cromwell comes in, right? He devastates Ireland, and Cromwell again takes land and forces people into exile. A lot of people then were sent to the Caribbean as slaves. Irish people were sent as slaves to the Caribbean. And then in 1690, you have the Williamite Wars. The Williamite Wars end with the Battle of Aughrim, 1691. In the Battle of Aughrim in 1691, again what happens is that the British forces, if you want to call them that, basically turn around to the Irish army and say, look, we actually could kill you because we have beaten you. We're quite legitimately prepared to do that. But Treaty of Limerick, basically the Williamite army say to James's army, which is Patrick Sarsfield and others, we're going to let you stay alive, but you can't stay here. You've got to go. So Patrick Sarsfield, with the whole Irish army, go to Kinsale. They go to the continent, and they're exiled to the continent, and they become what's called the wild geese. And they fight in the continent for French armies, Spanish armies, Austrian armies. And one of the big battles they fight at is 1745 in the Battle of Fontenoy in Belgium. And the people who fight at the Battle of Fontenoy in Belgium are Lully's army and Dillon's army, the Irish Brigade. And it's the charge of the Irish Brigade that beat the English forces at Fontenoy. And in that brigade were two guys, McCartans, the McCartans from here, from these parishes here. And those two McCartans are linked, and hence you've got the Liatroim Fontenoys. And for years I didn't know that. I drove past this club and seen it. I thought, that's a real weird name. Why would you call the thing Fontenoy? And I didn't know how I researched it. So it's the Liatroim Fontenoys after the Battle of Fontenoy, which is the wild geese. The next slide on your right is what's called the Ulster Scots emigration. And these were all Presbyterians. About 1715 was the first boat left here, was called the Eagle's Wing. And they fled Ireland because of discrimination. They wanted religious freedom. They were Presbyterians, they were dissenters, and they were discriminated by what was then the Church of Ireland, right? The Church of Ireland was the government church, and they fled to go to America to set up a new life in America. When they arrive in America, they go to the Carolinas, they go to Tennessee, they go to Kentucky, and they form the backbone of the Ulster Scots in that particular mountain range. And they're the people who fight in George Washington's army for independence. So when America gets its independence in 1776, a big part of that army are the sons and daughters of the Ulster Scots immigrants who went then. And in fact, if you look at the Declaration of Independence, you'll see the first signature on it is John Hancock. It's really large, and he was from Banbridge. So lots of people from here would have went then. The one everybody knows about, or knows the most about probably, is the famine. Famine hit here about 1845, lasted about 1851. It killed 1 million people, either through disease or starvation, and at least 1 million emigrated. People are now revising that figure. They think it may even have been more. So these are people who would have left these shores, pardon me, because they had no choice. There was no life for them here, and they left. A lot of them went to England, but a lot of them went to America. And they would have stayed mostly around Boston, Philadelphia, New York, stayed mostly around the East Coast. The emigration we're going to talk about is this one here in the bottom right. And this is the emigration from about 1870, probably up to the present day, actually. And this is an emigration where people are going for a better life, for a better future, for better money, or because there's no work here. So that's the emigration that we're going to sort of concentrate on. So let's look at what it was like here. We'll start with the famine, the Great Hunger, right? Potato crop fails, yeah. And potato crop fails, and because of complete maladministration, because of a lack of caring by a British government, because of failed sort of political and philosophical thinking, no relief is sent to Ireland. No relief is sent to Ireland. People start to starve. Start to starve. What happens is they can't pay their rents, they get evicted, and they go either one or two places. They go to the workhouse or they emigrate. Now that's a picture of a workhouse down at the bottom. And people always think that the Irish famine sort of happened in Mayo and Tipperary and Skibbereen and all that. And certainly that's where it was the worst. But it happened here, right here where we're standing now. In 1847, the famine came north, and came north with a vengeance. Banbridge Workhouse only had a capacity of 800. There were 1,600 people in Banbridge Workhouse. It had twice the capacity. The police had to be called to Banbridge Workhouse in 1847 to stop a riot of people who were trying to get into the workhouse, fighting to get into the workhouse. Now, the workhouse, if you entered the workhouse with your family, they split you off. They split the men off from their wives. They split the men and the wives off from their children. Your children were kept in one place. The men were in another place. The wives were in another place. And they made you work, breaking stones, picking oakum. There was disease in the workhouse. There was very poor food in the workhouse. So if you're fighting to get into the workhouse, what must it have been like outside? And in fact, when you look at the difference between the 1841 or 1841, the 1851 census, the population of this whole area in every townland drops by about 17%. And the number of derelict houses rises proportionately. And that is people leaving here and emigrating, never to come back. So don't believe that the famine was something that didn't happen here. It absolutely did. But that wasn't the end. Because in 1880, hunger came back again. And it came back because of a series of events. Firstly, you had 3 really poor winters. And these really poor winters, which were very, very wet, you had very, very little crops. So you had poor harvests. But meanwhile, the landlords were still increasing the rents. Also, you had a situation where America and Canada were now producing more food because the prairies are opening up. All the big beef herds in Texas are starting to get bigger and bigger. More food than the Americans want. So 2 things dictate what happens next. One are steamships, which can now cross the Atlantic in 10 days. And the other is the invention of refrigeration. So now we have cheap grain and cheap meat from America pouring into the United Kingdom. Pours into the United Kingdom. What happens is the prices in Ireland take a big dive. The average farm around here, this area, was about 8 acres, probably mountainous. And these are real quotes from Ballymacrecan. I always get these townlands wrong, but Ballymacrecan. This is Ballymacrecan. Pat Darby in Ballymacrecan was living on he had farmed 1 acre. He was living on a halfpenny a day, him and his wife. And all they had was meal and water. And even then, they said they had to kitchen some of the meal out to try and make it last by putting more water into the meal. Bridget Campbell, Ballymacrecan, no husband, 6 children, was found starving. And though she was found starving, the landlord sold the house on her farm beneath her and put her out, and we lose track of actually what happens to her. A deputation of farmers from here went to Lord Annesley, because Annesley's owned virtually all of here. And they pleaded with Annesley not to take the rents because there wasn't any money. And that's some of the names of the farmers who went. Now, why I'm putting names up is hopefully you will see some of them yourself and you'll think, that's my family or that's my grandfather. But those are the people who went to Annesley basically begging not to increase the rents. Annesley's reaction was this: eviction notices and ejection notices. And these are eviction notices, and that's who they were served on. And you can see the names Magdalena Gribben, Tier McCartan, etc. And what they said about Annesley was when he did evict people, he evicted them with a strong sectarian glee. Now, the Ansleys at this time were particularly bad landlords, really bad landlords. Didn't really care much for the people. And I have some quotes here from some of the papers. And this is Hansard, right? Ansley had 1,700 tenants in Castlewellan. Hansard said in 1904, he trebled the rent of James Gribben of Hilltown, refusing to acknowledge any improvements in farm by the tenants. He evicted James McMurray and John McKenny of Rathrail and confiscated their property. He destroyed houses. He considered the houses to be his property, and he fought against all the landlord legislation that was coming through at that particular time. So what you had here was not just a drop in the amount of money that you had, a drop in the amount of food, but you had a landlord who really didn't care. Now, in case you think I'm exaggerating, right? That's the papers of the time. And you can see the papers of the time, the Ansley estate, sheaves of ejectment notices. The ejectment is the first stage in an eviction. What happens is you serve an ejectment which says if you don't pay your rent within so many days, you're out on your ear. Heavy evictions, that was in his Cavan estate, and you'll see ruthless evictions, etc. That's him on the left-hand side. That's Hugh Ansley, who is the fifth Lord Ansley. And he was the one who the tenants would have met. He was an ex-soldier. He fought in the Crimean War. He was shot in the Crimean War. And he was a fairly ruthless landlord. Now, the Ansleys have a history. I talk an awful lot about the 1798 rebellion. And in fact, in the 1798 rebellion, it very nearly started a year earlier. Because what happened in 1796 is Wolfe Tone arrives with the French in 1796, but can't land the boats in Bantry Bay and heads off. The British then get absolutely terrified, and they say, we need to search. There's going to be a rebellion in Ireland. We need to search for arms. So they start through the militia and the yeomen, and Ansley and Hill of Hillsborough are the colonels in the Down militia, and they start searching through County Down for weapons, for pikes, for United Irishmen, right? What happens is the Down United Irishmen turn around and say to the main headquarters, look, we need to start this rebellion. We can't wait for the French. We're being tortured here in County Down. And in fact, they meet on Degament. 100 of them meet in Degament in 1797 in June. And in Degament, it's Roger McGuinness from the Defenders, and he turns around and he says, right, we're going to start the revolution. Ansley leaves Castlewellan to go to Banbridge to run the magistrate's court. We're going to capture his coach at Catesbridge. We're going to kill him in Catesbridge, and then we're going to go to the house and steal all the weapons from his house. And they're talked out of it by the local priest and the local doctor. Had they not have done that, the 1798 rebellion would have started in 1797, right? Now that causes a problem if you're a songwriter, because lots of people write songs about the 98 rebellion, and there's more words rhyme with 8 than rhyme with 7. So had it started a year earlier, we would have had a problem. But that's him, okay? That is him. So you've got a situation here where things are really tough if you're a farmer. You also had faction fights between the Orange men and the Ribbon men, right? The Orange men, everybody knows who they are. The Ribbon men were a bit similar, right? They didn't wear sashes and parade and all this. But what they were a force of farmers who had banded together to say, we're going to look after our people, look after each other. And they would fight fairly regular. And that's an example of some of the things were happening at that time. So 1850, John Kelly's house, who was an Orange man, he was robbed at Benraw. They stole his pistol, they stole his musket, they stole his sword, and they stole the drums of the Orange Order. Two guys, Cunningham and Brady, are fighting back at Derry. Two Clark Hill men attack Willie Hanna, an Orange man. Liatroim Plantation, which belonged to a guy called Robert Batt, was completely destroyed. Cornelius McGuinness assaults James Thompson of Clark Hill. 1899, Rathfriland band inside Catholics in Castlewellan. Liston Award flute band is stoned in Wrecker-Mayo. And in 1917, revellers from Gargery Chapel, from a sports day at Gargery Chapel, are stoned and beaten in Money Slane. So there's an underlying sectarian tension rolling the whole time through the country in different parts of the country. So this is happening as well. And you'll see Dolly's Bray that we all know about. The middle shot there is a nationalist march in Castlewellan. And then you had the police. And the police here were armed, right? The Irish Constabulary and the Royal Irish Constabulary were not like any other UK police force. They were always armed, and they were trained by like rifle regiments in the British Army, because their job wasn't just to be an ordinary police force, it was also to put down suppression whenever they could. But let's cheer things up a bit. Life did go on, right? And the church was massive. The church was absolutely massive in the social life. It was the focal for everybody in the area of where you lived. You had the Ancient Order of Hibernians here, you had the Orange Order. And we had the Gaelic League. And the Gaelic League starts in around this time, because what you start to get around this time is the famine takes a lot of Irish speakers out of Ireland. So you've got a period where Ireland starts to become sort of anglicised, right? But around the 1880s, what happens is people turn around and say, we need to get our culture back, we need to get our history back, we need to get a sense of Irishness back. So they then start to change things around. And that's where you get Irish literature and Irish poetry. And you get the rise of the Gaelic League, and then Michael Cusack and the rise of the GAA, and hence the Liatroim Fontenoys at 1888. So you're starting to get a sense of Irishness starting to perpetuate in the people. And one of the other things we had here is drink. One of the things we always have is drink. And just to lighten it a wee bit, here are a couple of offences that were around that time, and these are local men. Peter Ward was caught drunk and cursing Mrs. McCartan, who was the local landlady. He was done for that. And in 1912, John Morgan was done drunk and charged with a donkey and cart. Now, whenever John was done, right, he was done drunk and charged with a horse and cart. And he was fined 10 shillings. And he put his hand up and he said to the judge, "You've got it wrong, Your Honour. You fined me 10 shillings for being drunk and charged with a horse and cart. I don't have a horse, I have a donkey." And he says, "That's all right, I'll fine you 5 shillings then." I do a talk called Potching, Poaching, Peelers and the Petty Sessions, right? And in that I've explored the whole thing about pubs and spirit grocers and potching. And when they did a survey in 1870, they found out there were 60,000 places you could buy drink in Ireland. 60,000, but only 10,000 were licensed. So there were 50,000 unlicensed premises, right? And there we have Daniel O'Hare of Liatroim, who's caught running a shebeen. And Potching Anne Savage of Bacaderi in 1922 was actually manufacturing potheen. She had a whole potheen still, everything running in her kitchen. So there's this culture of shebeens and potheen and everything else. And it's not a bad thing, don't get me wrong. With my talk, I said, where else would you go? Why would I want to walk the whole way to Dromara to get a glass of really bad whiskey, when I can call into somebody's house around the corner and get a glass of good whiskey and meet all my friends? So it's a big, big factor here. But there was a social life. And everybody didn't see it as too bad. Here we have, from May 1889, a marriage has been celebrated in Gargery Church near Castlewellan between Miss Rose Rooney of Derryneal and John King, residing in the same townland. The united ages of the happy pair amount to 150 years. The bridegroom being aged 80 and his bride 10 years younger. Now you tell me, if that's not optimism, I don't know what is. And as well as local things, politics starts to heat up in a sense anyway, right? Heats up nationally. Because of the way the farmers were treated in the 1880s, this guy called Michael Davitt, with Charles Stewart Parnell, forms a thing called the Land League. And the Land League go to the British government and they say, we need what are called the 3 Fs. The 3 Fs are fair rent, right? The landlord shouldn't be setting the rent, it should be set independently. Fixity of tenure, that as long as we pay our rent, you can't evict us. And freedom of sale, which means we should sell our lease to whoever we want to get the best price. So that's what the Land League is pushing for at this particular time. And the British government under Gladstone give in and give them that. There's two reasons for that. Gladstone, who was Prime Minister, basically realised that to solve the Irish question, you've got to give the land back to the Irish. It was taken off them. We've got to get it back in some way and give it back to them. And the other thing is Gladstone had a minority government. And the people keeping him in power were the Irish MPs, who had about 100 seats in the Westminster Parliament. So it was the Irish MPs that propped up his government, and this is the price they exacted. They could put a bit of pressure on him. So the Land League start to change things for the farmers here, start to give them some rights. It also says they can buy the land. But here we run into a problem, because some of the landlords don't want to sell the land. And the other thing is, even if the landlords do want to sell the land, where do you as a tenant farmer get the money to buy it? If you go to the bank and you say, I want to buy the land, the first thing they say is, show me what collateral you have. You don't have any collateral. So what the government did under the Wyndham Act were two things. It forced the landlords to sell, giving them a slightly better price, and it gave the Irish farmers a government loan at, I think it's about 5% or 3.5% for about 80 years. So it changed the nature. It gave the people the opportunity to buy the land. So now we have moved from you being almost a serf to the chance you could actually buy your own farm, and you've got some rights to your own farm. But to do that, you need money. And that also could have been a driver for people leaving here. Because if you have 6 sons, but only one can inherit the farm, you've got, 5 sons, what do? Go to America and earn money. It's always an opportunity to help you to buy the farm. So things start to happen. Once the land problem's sorted out, we then have the problem of home rule. Because we then turn around and say, like, well, that's great, but we would like our own government back. We used to have a government in Dublin. We now like it back again. So you get what's called the United Irish League, and you have Liatroim branch of the United Irish League, founded by the Reverends Lowry and McClory. And in 1907, you visited this guy, top right-hand corner. He's called Jeremiah McVeigh. He was the MP. And he comes to Liatroim and hosts a meeting in Liatroim. And in fact, if there's any hurlers here, the cup that the Down senior hurlers play for is called the Jeremiah McVeigh Cup. And that's the man who gave the cup to County Down. Moving on, home rule's coming in. Not everybody's happy. Loyalists aren't happy, especially in the 6 counties. They see their future as being with the British government, with Westminster. They don't want to be ruled as what they see as a Catholic Irish government in Dublin. So they start to agitate against home rule. And you get the formation of Ulster Volunteer Force and the signing of the Covenant. And here, in this part, E Company, 3rd Battalion, South Down Regiment of the Ulster Volunteer Force were men from Benraw, Finnis, Lecanenny and Leitrim. So you're now starting a lot of political agitation happening here. So why I'm painting this picture is to let you see this is what it was like at this time. If you were growing up and farmed this time, this is what it was like. That's just a couple of wee clips from the papers which show you that. There's the Gaelic League, Cayley and Leitrim, the United Irish League, Leitrim County Down branch, and then arrests and deportations. And that was about conscription in the First World War in Leitrim. If any of you are interested in any of this, brilliant website, British Newspaper Archive. Go into it for a month. Don't take it any longer. Go into it for a month, and you can search it. It's a searchable database, and all the stuff about Leitrim and Beccaderry, you just type it in. It will all come up, and you'll all see it. Right, so let's get on to the second half of the talk, which is things are not going great. The area is not going great, and you decide to emigrate. And we are a nation of emigrants, right? In the 3 centuries, from 1700 to 2000, 9 million people emigrated from Ireland. 9 million. That's more than the total population of the island as we speak. There's only about 8 million people on Ireland now. 9 million people emigrated. So we've always been a nation of emigrants. In fact, what they say is the greatest gift we give to the world was our children. but it's also the saddest gift that we give to the world as well, because many of them went and never returned. 1897, a local man called Kelly stated that 450 men had left the townlands of Clonvarhan, Benraw, Beccaderry and Leitrim inside 10 years to emigrate. So you think of that population is virtually disappearing. And in fact, in Kilcoo, I used to say Kilcoo and everybody boos, you know. You say Kilcoo and Cabra and everybody boos, isn't that right, Kevin? My mate's from Kilcoo. But in Kilcoo, in 1928, Kilcoo won the Down Senior Championship. And when they presented the medals in 1929, 7 of the team weren't there. They were all in America. And that's how fast people would leave in order to go somewhere. And when you went, there was no iPads, there was no FaceTime, there was no phoning anybody up. When you left, you may never have been seen again. Those 2 adverts that you have there are real adverts in the papers at the time. So what you would do if you lost someone, you put an advert in all the papers that you could. Bottom one there says, William Smart left Clarkhill, Ansborough about 25 years ago. He was last heard of 20 years ago in Australia. And that's people desperately trying to figure out where their sons or their daughters or their brothers or sisters have ended up. And that was the only way that you could do it. If you didn't get a letter through the Leitrim post office here, the only way you could do it was get into the papers and try and get somebody to nail somebody down. So how did they go to America? In the famine time, it was the coffin ships, right? And they're called coffin ships because you can see where the people were in, and it was actually like a coffin. You got a space which was 6 feet by 6 feet, and that was for a whole family to go to America. These were not passenger ships, right? These were merchant ships. And the reason why they were carrying people to America was deadly simple. When they're coming from America, they're carrying timber, flaxseed, oats, everything else into the United Kingdom, right? But when they're going back to America, they're empty because the Americans don't need anything because they have everything there. Now, if you know anything about shipping, when you sail a ship, she's got to lie low in the water. Otherwise, she becomes very hard to control. So an empty ship carries what's called ballast. They put anything in, stones, wood, anything at all in the ship to make her sink in the water so she moves forward. So what they did in the famine times is they put in people, because people are ballast, because people drop the ship. So what they would do is they would sail the ships in, get rid of their cargo, get a couple of joiners in, build these platforms in a sense, fill them full of people, and send them back out. So it was, in a sense, human ballast. And that's what made it so profitable for them to send people out. When we get to about 1870s, 1880s, people are going on steamships. Regulations have come in. These are passenger ships with regulations. The journey time's cut down from 10 weeks to 10 days. And that's the difference in the journey time as people go. People leaving Leitrim at that time. That's a map of Leitrim in 1908. And you can see the railway station. The railway comes into Leitrim in 1906. So prior to 1906, there was no railway station in Leitrim. You would have had to go somewhere else in order to try and get out. So prior to that, the nearest station probably was Ballyroney. That's Ballyroney on the left-hand side. So what would have happened if you were emigrating? The family would have packed everything up, given you a few money, shillings to take on your way. Whole family would have went to Ballyroney, sat at Ballyroney, everybody would have kissed, waved goodbye, letters, everything else. And that's probably the last time you would have seen your relative. Certainly for a few years, and maybe the last time you ever would have seen them. They then went to Newry. That's Newry on the right-hand side. Then from Newry, you could go directly to Canada and America, or they could take you to Liverpool and then Canada and America. You arrive in America, mostly New York, and you end up here. This place is called Castle Garden. And Castle Garden is the precursor to Ellis Island. So Castle Garden was where they brought everybody in, had a chat to them, had a check their health and everything else. If you were too sick or too infirm, they just sent you back on the boat again. And the other ones, they were allowed to stay through and stay in America. So what about work? If you stayed in New York, Philadelphia, or Boston, the big cities, if you were big and strong, labourer or docker, right? Lots of Irishmen became labourers and dockers. But if you could read and write, different ball game. You became, most women would have became Bridgets or Biddies, and that was the name they had. So they were servants. And most big Irishmen became policemen. Because if you're a policeman or if you're a servant, you need to be able to read and write. Because if you can't read and write, you can't do the job. So people always say to me, why so many Irishmen in the New York police? That's why. And why Irish, right? If you look at this immigration at this time, besides the Irish, the only people coming into America are Lithuanians, Poles, Russians, etc. They're all fleeing the continent, in a sense, fleeing Europe, persecution in Europe. But most of them can't speak English, and certainly most of them can't read and write English. But because of the Education Act that was brought in, the National Education Act brought into Ireland, most Irish people at this time could speak, certainly could speak English, and most of them could read and write English. So that gave you a bit of a one-up in the chance of getting a job. If you went out west, three big options. You either join the army, the US Army, you go mining, or cowboys. So what we're going to look at is the last phase of our talk, which is the people who went to Montana. So that's Montana. Map in America up in the top. You'll see it's right on the Canadian border, and it's right nearly the Pacific coast. It's 2,500 miles from New York, right? So once you arrive in New York, having crossed the Atlantic, if you're going to Montana, it's 2,500 more miles to get there. Before the railway arrived in Montana in about the 1890s, it was a stagecoach. It went for steamboats and stagecoaches and all sorts of things. And the place we're going to talk about, which is Anaconda and Butte, is actually at the very edge of Montana. Now, two reasons the Irish would have went. Guy on the top left is called Thomas Francis Meagher. Thomas Francis Meagher was born in County Waterford, and he was what's called a Young Irelander. So he was involved in the rebellion of 1848 with John Mitchell, William Smith O'Brien. The rebellion of 1848 was a disaster. It's actually called the Battle of Widow McCormick's Cabbage Patch, because that's the only fight that actually took place in a woman's cabbage patch, and one person, I think, was injured and one person was killed, and that was it. That was the whole rebellion. But the British government charged these boys with treason, felony treason. They were charged with sedition. They were sentenced to death, and that death sentence was commuted, and they were sent to Australia. So Thomas Francis Meagher was sent to Australia and then Tasmania. He escaped from there, and he went to America. He becomes, fights in the American Civil War, becomes a brigadier general in the American Civil War, and leads the Irish Brigade for the Union Army. He fights at Fredericksburg, and in Fredericksburg he leads the Irish Brigade up a hill. Robert E. Lee and the Confederates are actually in this hill. They've been there for a long time. They're sitting in trenches. He leads the brigade up 4 times. They're nearly decimated. And the irony is, as they're lying there at night time, because they couldn't get back down the hill, when the guys are lying at night time, Robert E. Lee's army on the other side were Irishmen as well. So you have Irishmen fighting Irishmen in the American Civil War. And apparently they shouted to each other at night time over the battlefield, "Where are you from?" And "I'm from Waterford." "And do you know Billy from Waterford?" "And yes, he's Seamus's brother." So they actually had conversations back and forward, sometimes even in Irish. And that's Thomas Francis Meagher. And he becomes the governor of Montana. The other thing about Thomas Francis Meagher, which is a great quiz question, is Thomas Francis Meagher has given Ireland one of its most potent symbols. Does anybody know what it is? The flag, the tricolour. Well, Thomas Francis Meagher, in 1848 for the rebellion, he goes to France, and he says to the French guys, "Look, can you give us some help to get the British out of Ireland?" France are not interested at the time, but what they do is somebody gives them a flag, which is based on the tricolour of France, and it's green, white, and orange. So Thomas Meagher comes back to Ireland with the tricolour. So that's who gives the tricolour to Ireland. The flag comes from this guy here, Thomas Francis Meagher. The guy at the bottom there is called Marcus Daly. Marcus Daly is born in Ballyjamestuff in 1841. He goes to America at 11 years old. He's selling newspapers in New York. And he decides to go out west to join the gold rush. So he goes out to the gold rush. A wee bit of success there. He then goes to Nevada. He buys a silver mine in Nevada. A bit more success there. And then he goes to Montana. And in Montana, he buys what he thinks is a silver mine. And there is some silver in it, but not a lot. But what he finds is copper. And copper's not worth an awful lot of money, right? Until what's invented? Electricity. What do you need for electricity? Copper wire. Who wants electricity? Everybody. So the value of copper multiplies 100 times inside about a year. So it becomes from something that's not of great value to probably one of the things of greatest value to America, because all America wants to be electrified, and you need copper for copper wire, right? Where he works in Montana is meant to be called, or was called at the time, the richest hill on earth, because it's a huge, huge copper mine. Not only does he have a copper mine, but you got to smelt copper, so he builds a smelter, right? So you're not transporting the ore for it to be smelted down. He actually builds a smelter. And it's the Anaconda smelter where a lot of our guys end up working. Now that's just a sample. I'll leave that on for a couple of seconds. That's just a sample of some of the names that I picked up. And there's loads more. And I know there's people sitting in this audience who phoned me tonight and said, I have some more names for you, other names. But there are some of the names that you may recognize. Johnny Greeran from Degaman, Thomas Cunningham, Liatroim, Stephen O'Hare from Finnis, and Stephen O'Hare's people that sent us the copper cup from Anaconda, came from Anaconda. And Bridget Docherty from Derryneal. That's the guys there. That's the guys who work the mines. That's the guys who work the smelters, right? So these are the people who work there. So what was it like, Anaconda, at this time? That's Anaconda in 1880. The picture on the left, that's all cords of wood, because you needed wood to fire the smelter. So they would cut down every tree they had seen. And all that is wood all drying out to feed the smelter. The one on the right-hand side and the one on the bottom is the smelter. And you'll see the chimney. The chimney was at the time, and in fact still is, the tallest freestanding brick structure in the world. And that's in Anaconda. And that's what it was like. So the guys that left here, that's where they would have lived, and that's where they would have worked in those particular conditions. So what was Anaconda like besides that? Well, I have this picture up for a couple of reasons, right? Because there's always connections. The thing about Irish is you start off with one connection, then you get another connection, then you get another connection, right? This is Custer's Last Stand, right? And everybody's heard of Custer's Last Stand. Yeah, we all know what happened there, right? Custer's Last Stand was fought 250 miles from Butte and Anaconda, and 250 miles closer to New York in 1876, which is the same year that Marcus Daly arrives, and 4 years before your people start to come and work there. So your people are arriving in Anaconda just a couple of years after Custer's Last Stand. So this place was the Wild West. I'm not exaggerating. They were leaving the beautiful green fields of Ballyward and Bacadary and Derryneal to go to the Wild West. The cowboys and Native, you can't say Indians anymore, and you shouldn't either, but Native Americans. You know, this is what they were going to live in. The guy at the top left is called Miles Keogh. And Miles Keogh was born in County Cavan. And he was Custer's right-hand man at the Battle of Little Bighorn. He was killed. That's his horse, called Comanche. And his horse was the only thing that survived the battle. Custer was not very bright. He didn't do very well at West Point. He had more demerits in his class in West Point than anybody else. But he was exceptionally brave, but exceptionally stupid. When Custer arrives, he has a force of 256 men. And the scouts, who were Crows, Crow Indians, basically they said, in front of you there are 3,500 Lakota Sioux, led by Crazy Horse. So Custer thought, well, what we need to do is we can't let these boys escape. I will divide my 250 men and we will surround the 3,500 Lakota Sioux. Not a good idea, right? Not a good idea. Wiped out, completely wiped out to a man. The only survived was the horse. But the interesting thing is out of the 256 men, 100 were born in Ireland. Out of Custer's 15 sergeants, 11 were born in Ireland. So these were essentially guys who left here, born here and left here, and fought for the 7th Cavalry. What was it like for the Irish in Anaconda? 1898, the population in Anaconda was 15,000. 25% born in Ireland. Not of Irish extraction, actually physically born here. Population was 96% male, right? Not too many women. Finnegan's funeral home in Anaconda was made specifically for wakes because Americans don't wake. Nobody else wakes their dead. The Irish wake their dead. It was built specifically for wakes and for Irish funerals. It had the AOH. It had the Daughters of Erin. It had the Robert Emmet Literary Society. It had a branch of Clan na Gael in Anaconda. Big for family, church, social, sports, and very active in the trade union. And Irishmen then, the mines were a tough place to work, real tough. Americans don't like trade unions, but the Irish were one of the big drivers in starting to get trade unions forming in Anaconda and in America because they're people who do not want to be put down. One of the gambling and drinking dens were full of gambling and drinking dens because obviously there's no women, it's all men. What do men do? Gamble and drink when there's no women about. What else are they going to do? So lots of pubs, right? And one of the pubs, and that is the real name because it's in the Cunningham letter, one of the pubs that the guys drank in was called the Buckets of Blood. You know? And I see John Doyle there. Deborah said, where are you going tonight? I said, we're going around to John Doyle's for a pint, you know. And she'd think, oh, come on. I said, I could go to the Buckets of Blood, you know. John Doyle's maybe a better option. But mine and smelter death rates were 5 per 1,000, right? The United Kingdom at that time was 1 per 1,000. So 5 times the death rate in these mines than it was the United Kingdom. Why? Because there's a continual supply of Irish labour coming through the doors, right? So whilst they paid good money, health and safety was not a big priority. Lots of deaths from silica dust, miners' consumption. And Irish people were also subject to sectarianism and discrimination. In America at this time, you had a thing called the American Protection Association, which said jobs for Americans, no jobs for immigrants. We don't want immigrants. We want America to be for Americans. I wonder where I've heard that before. We want America to be for Americans without thinking that they were immigrants too. But that didn't really matter. So there was a lot of discrimination at that particular time. Ku Klux Klan, again, the Ku Klux Klan were very much against blacks in the south of America, but in the north of America, they were very much against the Irish and very much against Catholics because they seen them as disruptive troublemakers, not quite like us. America was formed at that time on what are called WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. That was essentially what America was at that time. So if you weren't in that field, then people tend to look down upon you. That's a real quote from Maggie Brannigan from Carcullion, and her husband dies in the mines. And her grandson, Jerry Collins, sent me that. And he says he can remember his granny going through all these wee brown photographs when he was a kid. And she'd show him these brown photographs of Anaconda and her husband in Anaconda. And that was the quote she said. She says, those old American mines killed my lovely John. I just thought it was just a brilliant quote. But it was very, very Irish. Let's talk about a few men from here. I can't go into all the ones, but I've got a few here. Thomas and John Cunningham from Liatroim, right? Thomas and John, son of Francis and Anne Morgan. Born here in Liatroim, 1855, one of 5 children. Both of the brothers go to search for silver. So they go to the sort of silver mines first, the goldfield silver mines first. But what doesn't happen, so they come back here, and then Thomas goes to Anaconda in 1896. Thomas never returns. We just lose all track of Thomas. We don't know where he is, what happens to him. He never returns. But John stays in Leitrim. He marries Elizabeth Shields in 1900. 5 of the Shields family even go to America, to Poughkeepsie. And John dies in Leitrim in 34, and his wife before him. And it's this letter from Thomas to John, which is a letter that started to form the whole thing about this particular talk. And that's the man there. Second man we're going to look at is James Hardy McGrady. All right? And that's him. Older photograph up there. You can see him with kids. And that's him below. But look at that face. Is that not a boy you want to share a pint with? Eh? That's a boy you want to see. He has some stories, that lad, right? Born in Macrameo, 1861. Parents, James McGrady, Catherine Charlton. One of 8 children. He had 3 uncles and an aunt already in America when he was growing up. One of his uncles was Charlie. Charlie married Minnie McGonigal. Minnie McGonigal was the daughter of Annesley's land agent. And they considered themselves quite uppity. So when she started going out with Charlie McGrady, it wasn't going to be a good thing. Her father was very, very annoyed at that. But they eloped anyway, and they got married. And he ends up in Indiana, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where he has 2 saloons in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And he comes back here to Leitrim, plenty of money. He's doing really, really well. So he comes back to Leitrim looking really well. James was farmed out as a boy to a local farm because obviously there wasn't enough work for him on a farm, so he worked in different farms. Goes to America in 1881. 4 of his siblings there already. He marries Mary Ward of Derryneal in Anaconda in 1888. And she went to America before him, and she goes as a Bridget, and she works in Boston. So she gets her fare paid for by a family in Boston. She works in Boston. She's got enough money to pay the family off the fare. And once she's paid off, then she leaves and she goes to Anaconda, meets up with James again, and they get married in Anaconda. And they have 8 children. He works until he's 75 years old in the copper smelters in Anaconda, and he dies in 1953. Our last one we're going to look at here is John McGrady from Macrameo. Born 1885 to John and Catherine McGrady, one of 7 children. And he played for the Fontenoy's Down senior team in 1920-21. And that's him ringed up there, John McGrady. So whenever the Fontenoys win the Down Senior Championship, he's in the team. He actually plays in the team. He emigrates in 1922 to Butte to join his brother Owen. And he marries Sadie Rooney, he's from here as well. Daughter of Patrick and Margaret. And they have 3 children, all born in Butte. This would have been the centre for them in Butte. That's St. Peter's Church in Anaconda. And that's St. Patrick's Church in Butte. And that would have formed the real focus of where they actually lived at that time. That's some more pictures of you. That's the daughters of Aaron. You'll see Butte there. And a lot of them went here rather than stay in New York and Boston. Because if you come from here, you're rural. If you go to Anaconda, yes, life is tough, but it's rural. You know, you're not living in a tenement, you know, and just near the docks in New York. You can get on a horse, you can go out for a bit of a ride, and you can see there a bit more space. They could have chickens and other things. So they were drawn to Anaconda, not just for the money, but the fact that it was a rural existence. That's one of the pubs there. It doesn't quite look like the Buckets of Blood, that one. And its Irishness, that's the Butte Wolf Tones, who won the 1911 Montana GAA football trophy. And that's them. And what I love, these are woolly jerseys, because they're all wool. If you can see there, the goalkeeper, it actually says, they've knitted in the front of his jersey, goalkeeper. You know? So that's the Butte Wolf Tones. I couldn't put their names, are brilliant, because they've names like Jimmy the Store McGreevy, Peter the Pigeon McGrath. They've all got a wee nickname in there somewhere. Absolutely fantastic names. So that's the boys of the Butte Wolf Tones. So to finish off, what is it like today, Anaconda, yeah? Well, this is it. Anaconda and Butte are still the most Irish towns in America. Much more Irish than the like of Boston, right? Far more Irish than that. They still have Hibernian's Lodges. They have a pipe and drums band, they have a GAA club, and a St. Patrick's Day parade. Bit different now to what it was. The smokestack is still there. It took millions to clean up the devastation that was left by the copper mine and smelters, millions of pounds clean up. But it's actually a very pleasant looking place. Oh, go back one. Still has Ancient Order Hibernians Lodge, still in Anaconda. I've been talking to the guys in it. Not too many Irish names, you know, a lot of Krizwickis and all sorts of Polish names and Russian names. So obviously I've got a link to Ireland. But it still has the AOH. And that's the Butte Wolf Tones today. The club is there, that's them. I was talking to Mickey earlier on, and he says some of them boys may not make the Liatroim 15, maybe a bit long in the tooth, but certainly enthusiastic. Certainly enthusiastic, and that club is still in existence today. That's their St. Patrick's Day, right? Biggest day of the year for them. And you can see their Guinness and everything else. And that's the Anaconda pipes and drums. And they actually aren't bad. You can get videos of them, and they aren't bad. So that's Anaconda today. So that's the connection. So what we have done is we've started out, and we've gone through what was this area like at this time, politically, socially, culturally, in terms of what were your people living, what sort of life did they have. Then what were the reasons for going, right? They're going to make money, they're going to send money home, they're going to try to get money to buy the farm, they're going because things are not looking too great here, there's money to be made there. And then what was it like whenever they got there? So look, it has been a bit of a gallop. I have loads of books here, if you want to come up and see them after, which cover all the things that we talked about. And certainly I'll endeavour to try and answer any questions that anybody has. But listen, oh, sorry, before I go, the talk's free, but we're doing a donation for Michael's charity. So I know some people paid on the way in, and people didn't know. If you have any money, throw some money on the way out, because we want to raise a wee bit of money for Michael's charity. But look, thank you very much for coming. This has blown me away. This is really super. Thank you. Thank you.